Thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Travis, my pleasure.
Yeah, man. Stoked to talk to you because, yeah, shipping containers are pretty sweet, man. It's something that I think most people, right, when they see it, it kind of just, it's different and it looks cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement. You're starting to see them pop up in the news here and there. And obviously, walking around big cities, there's, bars and cafes that are made out of them. So people are starting to kind of build their awareness up and think about, maybe this could actually work for me and my family.
Yeah, very true. So, I mean, let's just start like, tell me a bit about yourself and your website, your company, discovercontainers.com.
Yeah, so I am a mechanical engineer by degree and spent some time working in construction project management for a few years and went back to school, did some other things after that, but kind of had that background of building things and managing construction and, growing up, helped my dad build our house and stuff. So it was kind of fun. Kind of fundamentals were there in the background, and I actually purchased this website probably a year or two ago now. So it came up for sale, and I thought this kind of dovetails nicely with my experience and some of my background knowledge. So took it and been running with it.
Yeah, killer. And so now, so let's back up. You helped your dad build your family house?
Yeah, my dad was a little crazy, so he got this idea in his head that he wanted to build his own house. I don't know why, but I guess it was like his midlife crisis or something. And so it was like a 3-year process. Like every day after work, he would go there, and on the weekends I would go there and help him, and didn't do too much during the week, but during the weekends, yeah, for 2 or 3 years, we were out there almost every weekend, working on it. So got to see everything kind of come together piece by piece, and it was certainly a slow process with setbacks here and there. But I mean, he wasn't a professional builder. He'd just go to the library and buy the framing book or buy the plumbing book or something, and just kind of taught himself along the way. And
man, that's sweet. And he was still working full time and just did this, after working on weekends.
Yeah, he owns his own business, so he just kind of did it on the side.
Damn, that's awesome. That's pretty fun. So, what was the family reaction to that? Were you guys supportive, or were you kind of like, "What's Dad doing here?"
Yeah, I think there was some trepidation due to like how the housing situation played out during the construction, because we sold our previous house, so didn't really know how long it was going to take. So at one point, he was like, he just bought this RV, and we were living in an RV out on the land, and that pretty quickly went south. People weren't so happy about that, so we ended up getting an apartment instead. And time kind of drew out longer than maybe anyone anticipated, but eventually did get finished. So it was pretty good.
Nice, that's cool. Yeah, similarly, my mom's dad, my grandpa, built their house in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and basically just worked as quick as he could to get the basement finished, and then they all lived in the basement for a few years while he kept building the rest of the house. So I've heard stories of the family squeezing into tight places where everything's still under construction. So it's definitely sounds fun.
Cause a little bit of stress, I think, but it's pretty unique experience to get to see that kind of come together around you. So.
Yeah, that's fun. And I mean, that's kind of why I reached out to you, and I've been interested in container homes too. Is it's like it seems cool to build your own home, to kind of go through that whole process and work through as much as you can, hire contractors for stuff you can't do. So is that kind of who you cater to and help out? Is people who are trying to do it themselves, or people who are generally having it built by a contractor or another company, or like where do you kind of fit in and help people?
We help out both of those groups. There's and it kind of breaks down a little bit on size too. So there's a lot of people out there who are looking for basically a cabin, 1, maybe 2 containers. Probably not going to live in it full time. It's more like, their property outside the city, or, a weekend place or something.
Right.
Something that's that small is a little more manageable to think maybe I could build it myself. But there's also people out there who are building, 3, 4, 5,000 square foot, mansions, so to speak. Really nice houses. They're hiring a professional architect to come in and figure out all these crazy ways to stack them and stuff. People building houses that big, I won't say they're never doing it themselves, but it's more common for those people to hire someone. And then there's a lot of people that are just kind of in the middle. It's maybe, it's a 1,000 or 1,500 square foot house. They want to do some of it it kind of just depends on people's life situation too. Do they have the time to be able to dedicate to something like this, and do they have the skills necessary? It's not rocket science, but it is it's complex. You're building a house, but using a container, it enables you to skip a few steps. So when a container shows up at your house, you've already got floor, you've already got a roof, you've already got walls. It's already weatherproof. So you basically got a tent there more or less. So you can sleep in it on day one. It's not going to be good. You're going to have to pee in a bucket, and there's no running water, and it's going to be cold. But like you could sleep in there and be safe from the elements.
Right.
So anything after that is just making it nice, right? It's not making it a roof over your head. Whereas a regular house, you show up, you just got dirt there. You got to spend weeks, months before you get something that you can actually stick in. So I think for do-it-yourselfers, containers offer that benefit of, hey, I'm going to just skip past the first 10 steps, and now I'm sitting here with something that's actually ready to live in, and I'm now just trying to make it comfortable.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good point. I like how you phrase that, where you kind of, from day one, you already have the roof over your head, and then it's just making it nice. You got the necessities there, I guess, sort of. So, I mean, let's just start, like, why a shipping container? Like, what are the benefits, and reasons why someone might choose a shipping container?
That kind of depends on different people and kind of what their motivations are, but there's a few main reasons. So one of them is security. So security from other people, but also security from the elements, security from animals. So obviously it's a strong metal box compared to what you might build out of wood. It's just a little more durable. So if you're worried about tornadoes or you're worried about vandals or things like that, it provides a little more peace of mind in that area. And obviously, the more you start cutting into it, and for windows and doors, that can kind of be reduced. But there's ways around that of putting storm shutters or different types of grates and things over the windows if you're concerned about people getting in through the windows and doors. But anyways, that's one. Also, the kind of eco-friendliness. So people like the idea of taking something and recycling it, right? So there's a lot of the reason shipping containers got so exciting for people is that they see them sitting around everywhere. You drive past these port cities or even kind of intermodal ports that are inland, and you can see hundreds of these things stacked up. And I guess the thought crossed somebody's head a while back of, hey, maybe we could stack these up and actually throw a house in there. They're just sitting there kind of rotting away. At the 10-ish year point or so, these containers, for the companies that actually use them in shipment, they become depreciated and they start to get kind of some wear and tear on them, and it doesn't really make sense for those companies to invest anymore to refurbish them or repair them. And so those containers that have a variety of conditions, they're sitting there and they're available for a fairly reasonable price, and you can take them and put a new coat of paint on them, and if there's any rust or anything, scrape that off, fix everything up, and then you've got a great building block for your house. And so a lot of people really appreciate that. Some people just like the kind of the aesthetic of it, modern industrial architecture. You'll see this becoming popular, people using steel and concrete in their house, and you can look up Architectural Digest and see kind of that's a popular way to build things. And so containers are kind of a way to get at that. You can stack them up in different ways, and maybe put two together, and then the space in between them, you can have like an open area. There's just a lot of different ways you can go with them. And so people really like the flexibility. And then finally, I think it's just do-it-yourself friendly. So like we said at the beginning of the call, like not everyone wants to do a do-it-yourself build, but I think a lot of people do. A lot of the interest is, hey, maybe I could make this a little bit cheaper than it would cost me to build, or it would cost me to hire someone. And so maybe I can look into this and see what it would cost me if this is something. Maybe I haven't ever been able to own my own home before. Maybe I have a home, but having like the cabin we talked about out on the property outside of a city, maybe that's something that's kind of been a dream of mine, but I haven't really been able to afford it in my budget. And maybe containers will be a way for me to get there. So a smattering of reasons, but and that's not all of them, but those are some of the main ones.
Yeah. I had learned this before, but you can't believe or read it, or can't believe everything you read on the internet about
Sure.
wanting to. They don't for shipping containers. They don't keep track of what's been put in them. So they recommended buying a new one only because there could have been hazardous waste or radioactive stuff that was put in there. So is that a concern or not? Not really.
It's a concern. It's not a huge concern. So there's a few points on that. And so you're right. If a shipping container is actively moving, they have to put a placard on there that says there's something bad in there. But months or years later, that placard's been taken off. It's only when it's actively got something in there. So there's no kind of historical record of like, here's the 57 shipments this thing did in its lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
No one's really keeping track of that. It's just when it's actively shipping something, you know what's in it, if it's hazardous. But then after that, you don't know. So it can happen where things that are kind of nasty get in there. The only way that could potentially matter to you is the floor, right? So the walls and the ceiling, everything are steel. It's a non-porous material. So if you spill something on steel, it doesn't soak in. It just runs off down to the floor and it's gone. It evaporates. So the plywood floor, is porous. Things can soak into that. And so potentially, if something nasty was in there, and the next step is that it actually leaked out, then it could be in the floor. So some people like to replace the floor. Other people just kind of encapsulate. So they put like an epoxy or plastic cover over the floor, and it just kind of traps. If there's anything in there, which who's to say if there is or not, but if there was, you can kind of just cover it up, and then it doesn't really matter. So there's ways of getting around that. I'm not going to say that there's never anything bad in there, but it's not really, you could cover it up or remove it. So it's not really a big concern, I don't think.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, good point. So do you find most people are generally buying used ones as opposed to new containers?
It's just different for different people. It kind of depends on what their budget is, and it depends on kind of what their framework for purchasing it is. Because if you buy the new containers, you have that peace of mind of this thing, I know exactly what's been in it, nothing, because I just shipped it here empty. But then you don't have that eco-friendliness, right? You paid to ship an empty box across the world. And so it's not like it's someone made this thing and it's been used for dozens of years and now it's kind of on its last legs and you're saving it. It's someone made this thing a few weeks ago and it hasn't been used at all for its created purpose. You're just taking it and making it into a house. So, some people kind of get turned off by that part of it. It feels like I'm not really doing anything good for the environment here when I'm paying someone to make this box and I'm shipping an empty box. But it's different people have different motivations, so there's not really any one right or wrong way. But
yeah, that's understandable. I could see both sides of it. From your perspective, do you see that most people are just kind of using a shipping container as like the entire footprint, or are they generally like really cutting into these things and building extra structures along with them, or is it just kind of a mix of both? I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a mix of both. I mean, a common thing that we're starting to see that I kind of mentioned before is people either making like two parallel containers or making kind of a U shape of the containers, and then the middle area, they're just throw some wood or steel over that, make kind of a higher ceiling in that area, maybe make that their living room or something.
Right.
And so the containers kind of form the three walls, and you have like glass on the fourth wall or something like that. So that part is not actually built out of containers, but it has container walls. So you're kind of, just like I said before, you kind of skip a few steps, right? You're not, those three walls you don't have to build, they're part of the container. So it saves you a little bit of work there. Some people, they'll stack containers up right beside each other and they'll cut out the walls of the container. Then that gives you kind of a larger area, a wider area. Because, containers are not the widest things in the world, right? You're about 7.5 feet after you put your insulation and your sheetrock and everything up. So it's not a super big room. So a lot of people kind of have concerns about that and they want to get bigger rooms somehow. So, cutting them open and putting them adjacent to each other is another way to do that. But, it's quite a bit of work. And then you have to think about structural reinforcement and things like that. So the putting them next to each other but apart from each other kind of gives you the benefit of getting a bigger open space without having to actually cut into them too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that U shape before and it looks pretty sick. It looks really cool, especially with that. Yeah, people put that glass wall and stuff there. Mm-hmm. It looks awesome. And then you kind of get interior rooms then sort of too, along with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get the smaller ancillary rooms like, maybe your bedroom or closets, things like that, where you don't need a huge space, can be inside the containers. And then maybe like your kitchen and your living room where you want to have a big open area, they can be kind of in the middle. So,
right.
Yeah, it's it's a pretty interesting design. People are starting to do that, or even like kind of a dog trot where you have just the two, and then you could open up kind of the front and the back. If you have glass, you can get a nice breeze blowing through the middle. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. I mean, they're like Legos, right? You can stack them up
Right.
however you want to and arrange them however you want to. So
Yeah.
people like to just get them and dream about how they're going to move them around and stuff. And there's a lot of ways you can go with it.
Sweet. So is the I mean, you mentioned, kind of the structural integrity of it, how it's like a big steel box. Is it when you're cutting into the sides of the walls and just for windows and doors and even like that, is that kind of a big concern? Are you kind of, chipping away at the strength of the container that way?
You are to some degree, but if you're just putting a regular window, a regular door, it's not too much of a concern. When you start doing like a 3 wide French door situation, like a big sliding glass door that's 15 feet wide or something like that, now you've kind of got a little bit larger area. So the containers, they have on all their edges, all the corners, they have large steel beams that hold the majority of the structure. But the corrugated sides, they do supplement the structure. So when you start cutting into those corrugated sides, it does affect the strength of it. But again, containers are so strong, they're made to carry. A 40-foot container can carry 60 something thousand pounds of weight in it, and on top of that, it can be stacked, I think 8 or 9 high. So there's a factor of safety there, I guess. Of even if you cut into them a little bit, you still, unless you're having like 5,000 people cram into your phone booth style, cram into your house, and they all jump at the same time or something, like
Right.
any normal use of a house is not going to be for the most part a huge strain on the structure of a container. It's much less than the container in its prior life was completely full of stuff all the way to the ceiling. So you and your cat walking around are not stressing it too much. So even if you make a few cuts here and there, it's not going to be the end of the world. But we do encourage people to add some structural reinforcement when they do start making those cuts, especially if you start stacking things, which can if you're stacking containers directly on top of each other, then all the weight is transferred through the corners, right? But a lot of people like to turn them perpendicular, and so you're putting load basically from it's not going into the corner, just going into those beams. And so those beams aren't typically designed to be loaded in that way. The containers are supposed to be just through the corners. So you start turning them like that, you're kind of getting a little bit off the map of what they were designed to do. And that's where you really want to start thinking about talking to a structural engineer who can look at things and make sure everything's safe. So,
Okay. Yeah, because when you see them on ships, they're designed to just be stacked on top of each other, all in the same fashion.
right.
So do you ever really? Can you even get rid of those beams in the corner at all, or is that the entirety of the thing? Do people always leave those?
I mean, yeah, you couldn't really take out the corners. That kind of connects the the roof to the floor. Basically, it's all that load is going through those 4 corner beams. So, yeah, you definitely want to leave those in. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then how high did you say you could stack these things? Like if they're just straight up on top of each other?
You can stack them, I think, 9 high total. So 1 on the bottom and 8 above it, and that's fully loaded. If they're not fully loaded, you can go higher than that.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Because there's people building like apartment buildings and stuff with these shipping containers too, right?
Yeah, you don't see that too much in the U.S. right now, but there's some of the cities in Europe, like Copenhagen and some places in Germany and Norway. Some of those guys, they have a lot of student housing and different low-income projects like that are made out of containers. So they're stacking them pretty high. I mean, at some point you have to start thinking about is the wind going to blow this thing over? But so you can't make a skyscraper out of them, I guess. But for any reasonable person's house is not going to need to go 9 or 10 high. I don't think they don't.
Yeah.
They don't have enough money for that, so it's not really a concern. Most people are 2, maybe 3 high, and that's about the end of it. So again, it's a little bit boring if you're stacking them right on top of each other. That's how they're designed to do. Then you end up with a giant square. So people like to have them turn kind of crazy ways and things sticking out and cantilevered out and things. But when you start doing that, like I said, you're kind of getting away from how they were designed. So it's really important to have a professional structural engineer look at it. They can do some analysis and make sure everything is good to go.
Mm-hmm. So is this So I get if someone's doing this to try to be, environment like eco-friendly and everything, to kind of recycle something that's already been used and turn it into their home. But if someone's looking at this as just a cost savings thing, and let's say they're not going to build it themselves, like comparing using shipping containers to kind of a traditional house, is it going to save them money?
That's a common question, and I typically say probably not, but maybe. And I mean, it's like every question you've asked me so far, it's nuanced, I guess. But a lot of it is because people don't compare, apples to apples. They talk about, the container house compared to a traditional house, but are those houses the same size? Are those houses, do they have the same security? Are those houses, do they have the same type of foundation? So you end up like, well, my container is going to be, 960 square feet, 340-foot containers, or I'll build a 1,500 square foot house out of wood, and it's going to have, a slab foundation, but my container is going to have a pier foundation, and I'm going to have wood siding that a tornado would just eat through, compared to the container, and I'm going to have, really nice finishes with, marble floors in my house, but my container, I'm going to have, just leave the existing wood on there and throw some epoxy on top, and use some used cabinets that I got from Craigslist. And so it's like, well, wait a second, those things aren't anyway the same. Like, they're both houses, but everything else about them is different. So, and even if you have the mindset of, okay, I want to try to make them as close as possible in my mind as I'm kind of doing this analysis, I mean, it's tricky, it's hard. So it's really difficult to have a fair comparison of what do they cost. But in general, if you want to save money with a container, like, you could, because we talked about, it's already waterproof, it's already weatherproof. And anything you do past that, right, is just making it comfortable. So how comfortable do you want to make it? You can make it, pretty bare bones, no frills, for, just a few $1,000s, and it's certainly livable, and it's, cabin style, but you're not going to win, the architectural award or anything. So yeah, it's a tricky question. And then if you start talking about people doing it for you, in general, it's probably going to be more expensive, and that depends a little bit about where you're located, what type of contractors and designers are available out there.
Right.
And then also, is the person like coming to your site and building it, or are they kind of building it in their factory and then just shipping it to you? So there's economies of scale when people build them kind of away from your building site and then truck them in. You can have some savings that way. I mean, I've seen some contractors that sell, a 40-foot container as a cabin for $25,000-$30,000. That's pretty cheap for a cabin. But there's other places that are selling the same size, just maybe a little bit better, for 60, 70, 80,000. So it's over twice the price. So I mean, how do you compare those things, right? Which one is your traditional house more similar to? It's a tough question to ask, but that's a long-winded answer. But in general, I like to tell people, if you're coming into containers for the explicit reason of I want to save money, that's why I'm here, you're probably here for the wrong reason. You may end up saving money, but I wouldn't write it in blood. It just kind of depends on how everything kind of shakes out and what decisions you make. But if that's the only reason you care about it, then it's probably, you may end up being disappointed. So I think people should really have some other reasons why they like them other than cost savings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what can someone generally expect to pay for either a used, container or a new one?
So when you say new container, that is a little bit open-ended. So there's truly new containers that have never had anything in them. A lot of people actually look towards one-trip containers, which are, so it was made overseas. It had one shipment over to America or Europe or wherever you're located, and then it was sold. So it only had one load in it. So you can kind of know what that was. And it just makes more sense instead of sending an empty box somewhere, right? It just seems crazy. So if it's already coming anyways, and it's like it can hold something, why not throw something in there, along the way?
Yeah, that's awesome.
So those are in great shape. There might have a little bit of, scuffing or something in them, but otherwise, they're almost good as new. So people sometimes interchange the term new and one trip, but there actually are two separate things. But as far as price, so used can be a lot of different things. Used can be just covered in rust and like, not even worth your time. And use can be, really good shape. There's actually some intermediate rankings like cargo worthy, wind watertight, as is. A lot of places that sell containers will kind of rate them in that way. So you can you can get a 40-foot container for probably $1,000, but it's going to be pretty rough. Like you're going to have to do a lot of work to fix it up. It's going to be paint peeling. It's going to be holes in the floor. Like you may be able to see some sky through the roof. Like it's not going to be looking good. A more reasonable estimation for a 40-foot container that looks decent is probably on the 2,000 to 3,000 range for a used one.
Okay.
And then new or used, or new or one trip, probably more like 4,000, 5,000, something like that.
Oh, that's not too bad.
So they're not too bad, yeah. So you can buy 3 or 4 of these things for 10, 12 grand.
Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you would have to also talk about shipping it to your site too, or figuring that out, right?
Right. And that depends on where you're located. If you happen to be close to a major port, like if you live in Miami, like you're in pretty good shape, or you live in Los Angeles or Long Beach, you're in pretty good shape. If you live in the middle of Nebraska, well, these things are intermodal, right? They don't just come over ships. They come off the ship and they put it on a rail car and they send it. So there actually are ports that are even inland. So you'll see containers stacked up inland as well. So if you're close to somewhere where these things are stacked up, then it's not going to be too terribly expensive to get a ship. But if you're out in the middle of the woods in Montana or something, it might be kind of far from the nearest place that has them. So you're going to pay a little bit to get them shipped to you.
Right. Yeah, I live in Long Beach, and every morning I walk my dog, and I see the port. I see like thousands of them, so I could just go pick it up myself.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, anytime there's a big port city, a lot of companies that are just outside the gate or whatever that are involved in those things. So you can find them for fairly cheap.
Oh, sweet. That's good to know. Cool. So, man, okay, real quick, I had a question about, you mentioned this a couple times about containers being really good against tornadoes. Is that the case? Are they pretty strong, against getting hit up against tornadoes, and are people using them for, that purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I can't, say like definitively like this thing is going to be fine in like an F5 or F6 tornado or something. Right. Like it's hard to know if anything can survive in those things, but I'd certainly feel more comfortable in a container than I would in a regular house. So, take that for what it's worth, I guess. But again, the more cutting you start doing on them, you cut the whole side out and put, plate glass windows that are 40 feet long. Like, well, that's not going to do too well. So it kind of depends on your design. And obviously, you want to have them anchored down well. You want to have, it depends on kind of what's around. Are there trees around that are blocking some of the wind? Or is it sitting up on a hill where it's just getting the brute force of anything that comes by? So, I mean, there's so many variables that go into that. But in general, I think you'd be in better shape in a container than you would in a regular house. But are you 100% safe? Would I sleep like a baby in an F5 tornado? I'd probably still be a little concerned.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No. I mean that's understandable, but cool to think about. Are you? So I mean, with your website that you have and everything, what are the maybe top 3 questions that you get most often?
I mean, I think we've covered some of them. So, how much does it cost, or can I save money? Kind of that whole line of questioning. People that are, maybe they're coming into it for the wrong reason, but kind of helping them work through that, talk through that. Another question. I mean, a lot of times people want to know about the floor, or they want to know about, if there's been any caustic chemicals in there. There's also some concern about maybe the paint that was used on there. Is that paint okay, or is that paint that's kind of needs to be removed or covered up? But again, you've got the encapsulation option there. Just cover it up with high quality primer or paint that kind of keeps any toxins from leaching out. And then what's another question? Let's see here. I guess people just want to know about, can they stack them in different ways, and like what does that entail? And the recommendation is typically, if you're doing anything very crazy, talk to an engineer. Yeah. There's just so many different variables on top of what the stacking itself. It's what is your soil like? What type of foundation do you have? What are the winds like? Do you have snow there? How are you going to use a container? In engineering, you've got things like dead loads and live loads. There's just a lot of things that go into it. So trying to give someone just a quick answer to a really complex question is just not fair. It deserves having a professional do some analysis on everything that's kind of going into it, and they can give a real answer and not just a blanket answer that maybe isn't exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you do. I mean, I would assume probably nearly 100% of the time you need an engineer or an architect to really, finalize everything for you, even if you have pre-existing plans that you're using, right?
Yeah, there's kind of two different tracks on that. So a lot of people are building containers, like we said, out on their weekend property or something. And if you're in a rural area, depending on where you are, the rules are kind of slim to none, right? You're not in a city limit, so you may have some county or state rules that apply, but depending on what state you're in, those may not be much, if anything. So you can kind of just throw a container up on your property and no one really knows about it, and no one's going to really say much about it.
Right.
Whereas if you're building it in your neighborhood, there's a lot more regulation there. You're going to have an architect or engineer involved just to get all your city approvals and things. So part of kind of what the requirements are depends on where you're located, right? And certainly different cities have different requirements. If you're, in Long Beach like you in California, there's probably going to be a little more stringent than it is in Montana, for instance. Even if you're in a city in both, they have different types of codes, different types of regulations. So again, there's not one end-all answer, I guess. And a lot of people, an interesting question I get a lot is, hey, I live in pick a town, Florida or something, some little town never heard of. What, can I have a container here? And I'm like, well, there's no way for us to keep track of every city in the world and what their regulations are. On top of there being thousands of them, they're changing all the time, right? People are changing regulations, they're incorporating new codes. So there's just no way. Like, you have to call and ask. There's no way for any database to keep track of that. It just doesn't make any sense. So when people have those questions, like what are the regulatory requirements? Can I have them in my house, or excuse me, in my city? You got to just call and ask, and just find out what they say. So, and something that I've heard from a lot of people is that, and it's just kind of human nature, it's easier to say no than it is to find a way to get to yes. So a lot of this is in how you approach people, and it's a people thing, not necessarily an engineering task, right? It's finding the right person who's willing to work with you to figure out how you can get to yes. Because some people, they're just busy and they're like, no, you can't do that. Well, that's not really right. We could do this, but it's going to require a little work on your part. We're going to have to do some research. We're going to have to work around some things. And so it's really important for people to, try to find the right person who's flexible and willing to help them get across the finish line on their project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally. I've experienced that stuff myself. So that's very true. Are there cities or jurisdictions that just flat out don't allow any construction with shipping containers that you've experienced or found?
That I've heard of or experienced, no. They may be out there, but I haven't heard of them. But okay. I don't think it makes logical sense. If it does happen, I'd be curious to talk to the people that made that rule, because you can make container houses in so many different varieties. Like, what is the rule against? You can do external cladding and external insulation, cut out the interior walls, and you can make a house that you would have no idea it was made out of containers unless you got a hammer and started cutting through the walls and looked and saw, oh, wait, there's a container behind here. Mm-hmm. You can make it where there's no internal or external sign that it was a container. And so in that case, why would you rule against a container? Why? It's a strong steel building, right? So if there are any regulations, it's probably against something that maybe disproportionately affects containers, but is not actually against containers themselves, right? So there's a rule about, for like handicapped people, ingress and egress. You have to have a wider door, or the rooms have to be wider. Well, that's kind of hard to do on a container. Now I've got to stack two together and cut the walls out, but I can get around that. Or maybe it's about, in our city or in our neighborhood, our HOA, we don't want to have any, steel siding. We want to have something that looks a little bit nicer. Okay, well, a container is definitely a steel, and sometimes they don't look that nice if it's not a new one.
Right.
But you can put some cladding up. You can put wood or concrete or vinyl siding, whatever you want. and now it doesn't look like a container anymore. So you can get around that as well. So those aren't rules against containers. Those are rules against any type of house, but maybe a container is more likely to be affected by those rules, if that makes sense. So I think people kind of get that a little bit convoluted in their head. And so it's not so much that you can't have a container, as that maybe I'm going to have to tweak my design a little bit and make this container in a way that's going to, assuage any of the fears that my neighborhood or that my city has.
Yeah. So is it generally like an aesthetic kind of concern that communities might have? Because I think they look cool, and I think a lot of people are drawn to them because of the aesthetic. But I could see where in some places, especially the thought that it's just unpainted and doesn't look, it's not well taken care of. I could see how it wouldn't fit in some places, and track neighborhoods and stuff like that. So is that kind of the holdup generally, is just aesthetic?
I mean, for some places, yeah, it's aesthetic. For other places, it's some of the other things I mentioned about the size of it, or square footage even. Sometimes they want to say, we don't want any houses under 1,500 square feet or under 2,000 square feet. Well,
weird.
You can have a container as big as you want, right? You can just stack 5 of them or 10 of them or 20 of them. Right. There's no limit on the size. So that's not a container regulation. That's just a house regulation. But if you're going to have, if you're trying to build a 1 container cabin and you're going to put it in some expensive neighborhood, well, that's not going to work. Just if you wanted to build some wooden shack in an expensive neighborhood, no one's going to like that either. So,
right.
I think people, they kind of get a little tripped up on what the regulations are really talking about. I think aesthetics is probably a big concern, but it's not all of it. There's different concerns for everybody, and there's regulations there's some at the state level, not too much. There's some at the county level. There's some at the city level. There's some at even the neighborhood level. So there's a whole smattering of things that can affect you, and depending on where you live, there can be more or less of those.
Mm-hmm. So do you find that using shipping containers for construction is getting more and more popular?
I think so. I mean, just anecdotally, just from the amount of people, reaching out and having, questions or actually building them.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of interviews with people, and, there's a lot of Facebook groups out there and Reddit and all kinds of other YouTube. You're seeing a lot more people that are out there making them than probably were before. So, I mean, it's hard to quantify that exactly, what percentage of the U.S. or the world is being built containers. I mean, it's a tiny percentage overall compared to all types of houses, but I do think it's getting more popular.
Yeah. So why is that, do you think? What do you attribute to the popularity of it?
Some of the reasons we talked about before. It's eco-friendly. It's something you can maybe do yourself, or at least partly yourself. It's interesting architecturally. It looks unique. It's not like every other house. It's strong. It's kind of keeps you safe from the weather, keeps you safe from intruders, things like that. There's a lot of different benefits, and every person has their own set of things that motivated them. But whether they're purely motivated by it just looks cool, I don't really care how much it costs, I just want something that looks cool, or they're like, I just want something that's safe. I'm going to leave this thing out. I'm going to build this house. I'm going to leave it out on my property, and I only go out there once a month. I want to make sure that no one's going to break into it. Everyone's kind of got their own motivations for why they like them, but we covered most of those earlier in the call. So
right, cool. Okay, so now I kind of want to jump in as best we can. I'm like, it seems everything is so like case specific, about where you're at and what you want and everything. But let's try to just get a little bit of an understanding of like what it takes to kind of build a shipping container house. Like if you're just going to build more of a simple one where you're just going to use 1 or 2, kind of keep the main structure, just cut some holes for the windows and doors and stuff. Mm-hmm. Like what do you need to do in preparation for foundation? And then, if you need to do foundation, and then once the container arrives, like, what is kind of the first steps and what are you looking at?
Yeah. So you technically don't even have to have a foundation. I don't typically recommend that, but some people just put the container down on pieces of wood, or just lay it on a gravel bed or something. There is, depending on where you are, there is a concern of if you're like close to a river or something, the river can just come wash that thing away. So it's it's and there's videos of that happening.
Oh
They
gosh.
do float away.
They
So
flow, yeah.
um,
That'd be
so
bad.
we recommend that people actually build a foundation, and you can, because of the structure of them, even though a typical container is 40 feet long, you can actually just have kind of a foundation appear on the four corners, right? And then the container can kind of span across.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's interesting when people see containers stacked, they think, oh, it must be the bottom of one must be touching the top of the other one. Well, actuality, the corners are raised a little bit, just a fraction of an inch. And so actually, when they're stacked, they're only touching on those corners. The
Whoa, okay.
the roof of one and the floor of the other one are not touching.
Mhm.
There's a tiny, little air gap there, and actually the roof is not really very strong. If you want to, put a deck or something up there, you'll have to do some structural reinforcement. You can walk across it, but it might, bow a little bit. It's not really very strong. So
Gets a little dicey.
right. So anyways, back to your question. Yeah, we typically do recommend putting a foundation down, and there's a few different choices there, but that's something you can probably do yourself. If you're not stacking them and not doing anything too crazy, you could probably do that yourself without really any outside help. If you're in a city or you're doing something a little more bold in your design, you probably want to talk to an engineer who can help you with the foundation design. So part of that is getting a soil analysis done, and making sure how much weight can this soil hold. If you have more organic versus more rock versus clay versus sand, kind of the constituents of your soil, it has different capacities for carrying things. You also have like the freeze line. If you're kind of up north, you have to bury the foundation below where the freeze line is.
Right.
So that's a concern. But anyways, get the foundation done. Containers show up on site. They have like kind of roll off trailers, or they'll just kind of slide them off the back. If you do that, it's a little tricky to get it on your foundation. You got to be, well, basically impossible to get it to land on your foundation exactly like you do. So you probably have to have a crane or forklift or something to actually move it and set it in the right place.
Right.
Unless you're, not using a foundation, or if you're using a slab foundation, then you've got a little more freedom. You don't have to, get the corner to line up on, this one little area.
Mhm.
So you do that, and then anchor it down. Typically, people like to weld the corners to a piece of plate steel that's embedded in the slab or in the piers, and that kind of solidifies it. And then, like we said before, now you've got something that's weatherproof, that's structurally sound, and now it's just what I need to do to make it comfortable, right? So you need to get power to it. You need to get either sewer or septic tank hooked up to it. You need to have water hooked up to it. You got to do all those kind of utility things, and you probably want to have insulation installed. You can do that on the outside or the inside.
Mhm.
Then you want to start thinking about doing the wiring, doing the plumbing, putting the walls in, and then you've got things like cabinets and different fixtures. Put your shower and all those things. So after the container is set, it's not all that different from building a house, right? You do a lot of the same steps. It's just that the container, like we said before, is skipping some of those first steps. But then after that, it's kind of fairly similar to how you build a regular house after that for the most part. There's a few differences, but typically pretty similar.
Okay. So this is probably just more like a general construction question, but would you if you're having like a sewer lines and plumbing and everything, would you do that before and have that inside of the foundation, or would that be after the container is placed?
If you're doing a slab foundation, then you would have to do it before, because it'll be inside the concrete. If you're just doing those kind of four corner pier foundations, then you could do it afterwards. It just kind of depends. People that do that, typically the container is a foot or two off the ground,
Okay.
so you've got kind of an air gap there, so you could still kind of get in there and maneuver around. It's probably easier to do it beforehand. It's kind of hard to get a ditch digger under the container if the container is already on top. You may have to hand dig some, like the last few feet or something like that. But you could do it afterwards. But yeah, it's probably better to do that kind of stuff beforehand as you're kind of picking out where do you want the house to be, where do you want things to be oriented. You would probably be thinking about getting your utilities installed then.
Mm-hmm.
But you could do it later if your budget or your timeline for whatever dictated that.
Right. Man, cool. This is awesome. I feel like this
Yeah.
is a good like overview of I feel like everyone's kind of seen container homes on, Instagram and Pinterest and everything like that. They're so popular and they look sweet. It's rightfully so that they're popular. I mean, do you find that most people are cover up the siding, or do they leave that exposed, or is it just kind of split?
I think the majority of people are leaving the siding exposed. People that are not doing it are either doing it because their neighborhood or something doesn't want them to look like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people themselves, they just don't like the way it looks, which at some point you have to ask yourself, if you're covering everything up, like maybe you're going down the wrong road here. Maybe this isn't for you.
Right.
If people, they're kind of doing these mental Olympics and they're bending over backwards for how they can make this thing work and how they can make it look different than it does. And people write me, hey, I want to build like a gymnasium out of containers. I'm like, well, you're gonna have to cut the sides out of like 20 of them. Like maybe you should just build a regular steel building at that point. Maybe you're using the wrong starting place here. So they don't work for every situation. They don't work for every type of project, but for the right thing, they do work well. And most people do want to see that they want to see that corrugated exterior, and that's part of what makes them resilient, right? If you start to put something wood on the outside, well, then you've kind of lost a little bit of the security of it. It's nothing's going to get inside, but you may come in after a heavy wind and it's blowing all your stuff off. So the inside is still safe, but all your cladding is falling off. So there's so many variables on how you attach it, what you use. Like I hate to say that that's a valid concern, but it could be. So, but yeah, most people want to see what the container looks like. They want to leave that exterior exposed.
Yeah. So it seems like just from me seeing homes out there, generally the majority of the homes are smaller ones where it's just like a 1 to 3, maybe 4 containers. Would you say that's probably true? So it's generally smaller homes that people are using this for?
I'd say that's true. Yeah, the majority.
Okay. Yeah. Damn, Aaron, this is awesome. So, okay, this is great. We covered a lot of stuff. Can you tell me about discovercontainers.com now and the plans you guys offer and the help you guys do?
Yeah, so Discover Containers is really just a place for people to come that have questions. A lot of the questions you asked and a lot of other questions. We have articles that go into a lot of those different things. We have a lot of interviews. We've just started in the past few months interviews with short-term rental hosts. So there's a lot of interest from people who are like, I've already got my house. I want to either plop a container in the backyard or plop a container on, my land that I have down the street and, use that as an Airbnb. And so we've probably got, 5 or 10 people so far that we've interviewed all around the world that are, kind of peel the curtain back and show what it was like to not only build a container or purchase it, but then operate it as an Airbnb. We've also got people who actually live in their containers who've done interviews with us as well. So we like to have kind of a mix of, technical articles and informative stuff, but then also getting to hear from real people who have kind of gone down this road before. It's really motivational for people that are kind of thinking, I don't know if I can do this. This seems like a little bit of a heavy lift for me in my experience. But when you see like, well, Bob and Judy over here, they're pretty normal people and they did this. They came out on the other side with a success story. Maybe I could do it too. So we really like to highlight those stories as well. But we have a lot of information for free, and then we also have the plans that you mentioned, and then also an ebook. And so people that are ready to get serious, whether that's they want to build their own or they're thinking about hiring a contractor or a builder to do this, we think it makes sense to spend a little bit of money compared to spending 30, 40, 50, however much thousands of dollars. What's $50 or what's $100 of an investment, and making sure this makes sense, right? So you're getting ready to hand over a big check to people, or you're getting ready to spend a lot of money on yourself. If you're going to do it yourself, you deserve to kind of make an initial investment to make sure you're going down the right path. So we have a set of 54 plans that are available, and those 4 plans are not super detailed to the fact that you could get those, and they're not architecturally stamped. They're not stamped by an engineer. It's really difficult to have plans that would work anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world. Even in the United States, most architects and engineers are licensed in the state that they live in, the state they practice in. So you'd have to have different architects, different engineers doing stamps for different places. So people sometimes will say, well, I don't understand the pricing here. But it's hard when you think about what it would cost to hire an architect. We're not providing super detailed plans, but you get 50 plans for $49. So it's less than $1 a plan.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be hard pressed if you go to houseplans.com and you want to buy one house plan. It's $500, $1,000
wow.
just for one. Yeah. So obviously, comparing something that costs $1,000 to something that costs $1, like, yeah, the detail is not going to be there completely. So our house plans are more for looking at, what are the different ways you could orient these things? What are the different ways you could lay out rooms? Just kind of helping people that maybe don't have a lot of experience on the different ways you could combine these. And if you have a lot of do-it-yourself experience, you could take our plans and actually build something off of them. But if you live in a city, or maybe you're not such an experienced do-it-yourselfer, you probably want to take our plans to an architect and have them formalize it. And then our book just really goes through the entire process of selecting your containers and building them and turning them into a house. And so it's 98 pages of diagrams and pictures and text, just helpful to people that either want to build or buy it from someone else. And I think it really makes sense. Like I said before, if before you're getting ready to hand over a bunch of money to someone, you don't want them to be able to take advantage of you and have a huge information asymmetry where they can kind of pull the wool over your eyes, right? Because there's a lot of people out there that are getting into container construction, people that maybe don't know exactly what they're doing, right? There's a lot of kind of fly-by-nights. They throw their website up and they start building containers, and next year they're not in business anymore. We've seen that quite a bit. So I think you deserve to do some due diligence and understand kind of what you're buying, and that way you can kind of make sure, hey, did you check this? Hey, are you doing it this way or that way?
Mm-hmm.
Just so you can be a more educated consumer. So we provide the book and the plans. They're $49 each, or if you buy them together, they're $69.
Sweet. Cool. Yeah,
Yep.
no, it seems like a great, starting point, especially to get some ideas with the plans and everything. And then, like you said, educate yourself on the whole process so you really know what it takes. So
Right.
It's great that you guys are offering that. When people are looking for an architect, you might cover this in your book, I guess, but when they're looking for an architect or someone to help them, is it a good idea, or is it possible generally to find an architect who's worked with containers before?
It is. I mean, if and when possible, that makes sense. And
Mm-hmm.
we've got a list internally that we've been kind of assembling over the past year or two. And so if people send us an email saying, hey, I'm in this city, we can kind of give them a referral for different designers and engineers that we know that are kind of in the general area that have worked with containers before. So we're trying to kind of figure out how we can put that online in the best way, but we haven't got there yet. So right now it's just kind of a manual process. If you've got a question like that, just send us an email. But yeah, if and when possible, it does make sense, because there's, like I said, it's not rocket science, but there are a few differences between traditional construction. One of the bigger concerns is condensation. So
Mm-hmm.
if you live in an area that gets cold, because it's a steel building, you can have condensation issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so how you insulate and how you ventilate, some of those things can be really important to ensuring you don't have condensation on the inside. And so an architect maybe that's not super experienced with containers or even building in steel buildings just may not know that that's something to consider, right? So things like that, someone could have the best intentions, but just not have the experience to be able to know some of the things to look out for. So,
right.
Yeah, it just makes sense to have someone that's got a few under their belt if you can find them.
Cool. That makes sense. Yeah, this is great. I'm totally gonna buy both the book and the plans, because I'm like, I really want to build my own container house. I just don't know where I want to live yet, but once I do, it's gonna be good. Oh, do you ever have people who, like, is it possible to build a container house and then move it fairly easily, depending on if you build it properly, or is that not really done?
It's not super common, but it can be done. It's obviously easier if your container house is one container, right?
Yeah.
If you've got multiple containers, typically people are welding those together, so they're not really coming apart very easily. You got to get your grinder out and cut them apart. So those containers are not moving too much. But if it's a single container, then yeah, you can throw it back on a truck and move it somewhere else. But it's not. People aren't using them like RVs. They're not like put my container in, Colorado in the summer, and I, put it in Florida in the winter. Like, I've never seen anyone who's doing something that extensive.
Right.
At that point, it probably just makes sense to get something that's got wheels on it, but like a tiny house or an RV. But you can move it if you ever wanted to.
Sweet. Cool. All right, man. Well, I'll have the link for discovercontainers.com. People can check all that stuff out and learn more from you. And thanks for being on, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Travis.
Yeah, sure thing.